Thanks. So John took us through some language on Tuesday that was related to changes in house site exemption, which was part of the governor's education transformation proposal. If folks remember when Jake presented from tax, presented that to us, there was this chart with greens and reds. I asked Julia to essentially run that construct, but with a new set of numbers to see if we could smooth the curve a little bit and have more people be better off as a result of those changes, because the construct itself sounds very lovely and simplifying. And so Julia is going to take us through some math, please. Thank you. And again, we looked at that language on Tuesday, but it's, I think, easier to understand with JFO than maybe with John, though he can run us through the language again. And he explicitly asked me to tell you all that if any of you want to sit down one-on-one to talk through any of that language, you're welcome to talk to him. He would welcome it.
Hi, I'm Julia Richter with the Joint Fiscal Office.
Would you like to share your screen and the slides and such?
Yes. So there is a slide deck on the committee page under my name titled Homestead Exemption, and I'm struggling to multitask today, so bear with me.
Welcome.
It sounds like a lot of us are having trouble today. Thank you. Yeah, I guess not just today, but especially today. All right. So homestead exemption. So a reminder, we're nonpartisan legislative office. Unbiased fiscal analysis. So what are we talking about today? As the chair mentioned, walking through the homestead exemption. So starting out with a review of our current law, income sensitivity, what a homestead exemption is, and then the modeling assumptions that tax department and JFO have used in the modeling. We've intentionally aligned in terms of our assumptions so that you can compare the different structures, apples to apples. And then walk through what the administration's proposal was, and then the exemption that was included in the Ed Finance proposal draft 1.1 language that is on the committee page. So just level setting, because you have been going through all sorts of different topics as of late. Under current law, there's a property tax credit income sensitivity. Essentially, if a household were to pay less on income tax, on the education income tax than the property tax, that difference is calculated and applied in a credit on the following year's tax bill. About 2/3 of Vermont receive some sort of property tax credit. We looked at modeling several weeks ago about how the liability shifts with or without the property tax credit, right? So not all households are receiving a property tax credit for their full liability. The property tax credit is based on different parameters, most of which live in statute. So you've got your household income in sort of these different bands. And then based on household income, you can, the property tax credit is calculated against a certain house site value, also laid out in statute. There's that below 47,000, that circuit breaker, where essentially a household can only pay a certain percent of their household income on property value up to 400,000 of house site value.
And that additional, if I could, is what you just referenced was that additional tax relief?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. So I said in words what that additional tax relief is.
Yeah, thanks.
Mm-hmm. So a homestead exemption, so that's what we have under current law. A homestead exemption is essentially a different way of income sensitizing property tax. And essentially what it is excluding a certain portion of a household's property value from tax. This decreases the overall tax liability or the overall tax bill by decreasing the property value upon which a tax rate is applied to, right? So we've got our tax bill, which is the function of the property value and the rate. So what the homestead exemption does is it adjusts that property value in that bill calculation. And lastly, level setting. These modeling assumptions should look very familiar from when I was last in here talking about income sensitivity, but essentially, I just want to name, there's a lot of assumptions that have gone into the modeling behind the scenes. So we're looking at fiscal year 2025 data, like the tax, all of this is the same as what the tax department has done in their modeling. So looking at FY 25 data, we're assuming that the property tax credit that was earned for the FY 25 bill is also applied on the FY 25 bill. So a way of getting at how much do property taxpayers actually owe. We projected the income using consensus growth equations and assuming, unless otherwise mentioned, that everything else is held equal. And that, the estimates are preliminary. So who are we looking at? We're looking at households with household income under 115,000. The reason we're focused on these is because households who do not qualify for a property tax credit, who are above that 115,000, don't necessarily submit, don't need to submit paperwork corresponding with their household income. So we have an incomplete data set above the 115.
So you're talking about the documents inside your tax return?
So yes.
Okay.
So essentially, under current law, when filing for the property tax credit, there is something that says at the top of the homestead declaration, I don't know if it actually says it at the top, but when you're filing your homestead declaration, if you have household income that's greater than 115,000, you will not qualify for a property tax credit. So there's no reason for you to fill out additional paperwork. Below 115,000 or below, you do need to fill out that paperwork so that you could receive a property tax credit, if it makes sense. And the reason
That makes this all somewhat hard mathematically for you because you're sort of missing the top end of your data set.
Yes. And so this table that we're looking at here is all of the same data that I have presented to you previously, but I broke it out into more granular income groups. So essentially what we're looking at here is on our left, our household income group. And here at the top, the equalized house site value group. So the way to read this is, if a household income is between 0 and 25,000 in FY 25 or FY 24, and the house site value is between 0 and 100,000, there's approximately 2,100 households who fit those parameters.
Oh, sorry. It looked like you were, anyway, go ahead.
Can't remember. I think I've asked this before, and I think where would I see something where I would see the total impact on each of these household income groups and on-site values? When you add a municipal tax burden. Yes.
So this, what we're looking at here is only looking at the number of households that fall within these groups. So right now, we're not looking at any tax bill or liability on this chart. The following chart does that. This is showing the average bill for the same groups. When factoring in municipal, I'm not sure. I I would, sorry.
Just sit back.
I actually have like a vague memory of Scott Speck doing that like off the cuff in committee, Carol. I don't remember, but maybe we have gotten testimony on that before.
Yeah.
We haven't done that.
I haven't done that. I focus on statewide
Yeah.
property taxes, so not on the municipal portion of things. The tax department does have a lot of data on their website about municipal rates. So that would be one way of going about it.
And we only have until like 11:30.
So should I speed up?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's our average bills. Administration's proposal for a home.
We will do this again. I promise we could even do it word for word again in a longer branch. I just want to make sure that we like don't leave Tuesday hanging too far into the future, so.
Okay, so administration's proposal for homestead exemption. This is what Jake presented a while back. I've screenshotted from his presentation. Essentially, what we're seeing here is the different household income buckets and the proposed percentage exemption corresponding with that household income. They also proposed a maximum exemption by income. I made this chart because I like to visualize things in terms of what is the structure of the administration's homestead exemption proposal. So essentially the way to read this is on the x-axis, we have our household income. On the left-hand Y, we have the house site exemption percent. And on the right-hand Y, we have the maximum exemption. Our green line is showing us the percent exemption corresponding with this left-hand side. And our right hand is showing us the maximum exemption with the blue line. So essentially what you can see here is that kind of up to 90,000, the maximum exemption is 200,000, and at 90,000, it would drop to 50,000. You can also see the similar differences at certain income levels corresponding with their framework. So this chart is showing the exact same thing in the table. It's just a different way of presenting it for visual folks.
Could you make that a tiny bit bigger? Thank you. That's good. I've had a fill on my face and you can see.
I'm sorry.
It'll get better.
I needed it bigger too, so thanks for asking.
So this is what the administration presented. I'm going to zoom back out just so we can go on to the next slide. And I can make this one bigger as well. And this is what the chair was referencing, that table that was presenting the average impact of the proposal by income and property value. And essentially the way to read this table is, again, we have income in the left-hand side, house site value at the top, and all of the red numbers correspond with that average increase within each one of these buckets under the administration's proposal. And the green represents the average estimated decrease. So for instance, here with incomes between 0 and 10,000 and house sites between 0 and 100,000 of equalized value, the administration's proposal would correspond with an average bill increase of $100. So what we're seeing here is that the lower income households are estimated to see an increase in their average bills. And the households between 90 and 115,000 are really the primary row in which they would see an average decrease in their bills. And because the way that the administration modeled this, it's cost the same amount as the current property tax credit structure. So households with incomes greater than 115,000 would see an estimated no difference in their bill.
And that's the straight line.
That is the row that doesn't exist here because we don't have that data. So if there was a 115,000 plus, there would be another row in there and it would be all straight lines.
Is the income, AGI, just a gross?
No, the income is household income. And so that's still the same income definition that we use for the property tax credit under current law. And the intuition of that is essentially, I mean, there's some technicalities, but basically it's the total income of everybody living under that roof,
Okay,
with the exception of a few categories written into statute.
okay, thanks.
So for instance, my husband and I, when we're calculating our household income, we're looking at my income, we're looking at his income, and we're looking at any other income that we might have coming in from other sources.
And that's prior to any depreciations or business deductions, or again, based on what you may pay on federal and state income tax?
It's a good question. I would need a friend of John,
Okay,
right, the legislative counsel, but he can follow up.
okay.
Yeah, I'd like to know the answer to that too.
It's not AGI. I mean, so you're not counting dividends and interest or capital gain or deductions for charity or anything like that. It's just.
We can spend some time on that, and if anyone has any interest in improving it, they're more than welcome to go out that one.
Thanks.
Yes.
Thank you. Do you have any kind of, or could be created easily, a heat map of where the properties are over 400 in the state and 300 to 400 to 25, et cetera?
I think that's a great question for the tax department.
Okay.
Julia.
Okay, so this is the average impact. We're seeing here the lowest income increase, the higher incomes in the chart, an estimated decrease. So now moving into the homestead exemption that's included in the draft 1.1, that's on the committee page for the Ed Finance proposal. It changes the parameters within the homestead exemption of the administration's proposal. So it maintains the general structure of the homestead exemption, but changes the bounds of the income groups and the house site exemption percentages. Right now, there's no maximum exemption in the proposal, nor a senior specific exemption like the administration's proposal. And it is estimated to cost approximately 45 million more than the property tax credit under current law. And for the purpose of this modeling, I have assumed that that 45 million is not going to be raised by the homestead property tax, because then we get into that iterative process, right? Of we raise it on the homestead property tax, and then we need to go back and recalculate the cost of the exemption and so on and so forth. So this is a table that shows the homestead exemption included in the draft. Essentially, what we see here is that as the household income increases by approximately 10,000, the house site exemption percentage decreases by 10%. So once you're at 50,000 of household income, for every 10K the household income goes up, the house site exemption percentage goes down, corresponding 10%. I put the same chart together, not the same chart, but the same structure, the same, to be able to look at what this exemption looks like compared to the administration's proposal. So here we see, because there's no maximum exemption, there's no blue line on this chart. And what you see here is the step downs of the house site exemption percentage corresponding with the household income. This is the estimated average impact of this proposal by income and property value. So the way to read this chart is all blue cells represent an estimated decrease in the liability, the bill of that group. So for instance, here we see that for households with an household income between 0 and 25,000 and a house site value up to 100,000, those households would see on average an estimated decrease of $130 their bill. we see in this that by and large, most households would experience a decrease in their tax bill. The only increases would be in these three parameters here where it's white. And again, this would cost an additional 45.
That's annual.
Yes, so this is reflecting the math that I did behind this table is said. I calculated by household the liability under fiscal year 2025. And then what the liability would be under this new house site exemption. And the liability of the bill, you know, FY 25 or under this exemption. And then what was the difference? If it's blue, it means that that taxpayer or that household would experience a decrease in their bill. If it's white, it means that they would experience an increase. And the scale of that decrease or increase is what we see here in numbers. Average.
So a few questions for folks or context for folks. One, just a reminder, I don't have the bandwidth to phrase this as a question for Julia, so apologies. Charlie has been diving deep into yield bills from days of, thank you, past yield bills, and was just showing with Julia, and was just showing me how much the cost of the property tax credit has sort of changed year to year and really like gone up and down in quite significant ways. And so I just want, maybe he'll hold up his notebooks on it. It's a very cool chart. Anyway, I'm just saying that as a reminder that like it's not like a regular appropriation. It's not like we set the cost of the property tax credit. It's that the property tax credit is a result of our other policy decisions. And it's sort of folded into how the whole thing works. And so it's gone up and down quite a lot over time.
That's so easy to read.
Magnify that, please.
You can forward it if you like.
Yeah, we will sit down with that.
It's pretty fun. Okay, thanks. So I just want to give that context
Could you
for
say
us.
what you said again about that then? It's not
That's a-
based on, we don't say this is how much we'll spend on it. We just do what?
We make policy decisions that lead to and tax rates and the state of the economy and state of property values and all those things. All lead to certain households being eligible or not eligible. And that leads to how much the property tax credit costs in a given year. It's not like an appropriation that goes up or down based on policy decisions. So just sort of, if for whatever reason, that feels like helpful context.
Sure.
So I have a question about this screen that we're looking at that Julia.
Yeah.
Okay, my question is, do you have words to explain to us why this little L-shaped white block occurred?
Great question.
Yeah.
I can try. So it gets back to that visual that we've used in the past of squeezing on the balloon and where all of the cliffs and parameters exist within the system. So it's not a coincidence that this is occurring up to and right before that 90,000 threshold, right? The 90,000 threshold exists in current law. You'll recall that the property tax credit is more expansive. It can be applied against a greater house site value below 90,000 than it can above 90,000. So what we're seeing here is essentially that, you know, above 90,000, the property tax credit is not providing the same sort of relief to households, which is why we're seeing it here.
Is there some change we can make to get rid of that white block?
So those are all policy questions. And the other piece, so I would say, and I know we're pressed for time here, but when thinking about this white L, thinking about one, it's reflecting how it would change compared to current law. And two, it's reflecting the proposed exemption structure that we're looking at here. So when thinking about changes or policy goals that you would want to make to perhaps lessen or change this white L, that would be a reflection of either changes would likely need to be reflected in changes to the exemption, the structure that is included in the draft. And then also would likely correspond with an additional cost unless the exemption in one of these other blocks were to be changed as well. So thinking about, where we're increasing the exemption and where we're decreasing the exemption.
Representative Holcomb.
So in that vein, if it was 5% increments, how would the L group change? And do you have the ends for each of those boxes?
So I'll answer your second question first. The ends, you mean the number of households in each? Yes, and that is, excuse my scrolling, way up here.
Oh, and that's for your new.
Yeah, so
Okay,
this
model. Okay,
is,
that is for the model.
so I intentionally set up
Okay.
this table
Okay,
with all of the parameters to match
okay, that's great. Thank you.
this.
Yeah.
To match this. And then your first question was if it were 5% increments. When you say 5% increments, do you also mean 5,000 increments here as well?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I'm just trying to understand I'm trying to visualize how what you just said in words.
I would need to do that modeling, which I can do.
No one else feels that I want to make you work hard. It's helpful just to understand how the different changes are changing the shape of that L.
Yes, absolutely.
And do you have any sense of what it does to people above 115?
So that's the question. If the 45 million were to not be raised on the homestead property tax, then it would have no impact on folks above 115 because currently they're not getting a property tax credit. And if the 45 million is not falling onto the homestead property tax, then they would not see an increase in bill. If it were to be raised by the homestead tax rate, then it would increase the bill of above 115.
So am I correct? This particular chart is is offering the differences between the new proposal and the current system,
Correct.
which means that those in the white blocks are just not being benefited as much in the current system as other blocks are. So it produces this difference.
I think that could be one explanation. The other piece of it is, and I don't know how to disentangle the two. The other piece of it is the structure of the proposal. Right, because the proposal is.
Where are those people on that? Can you point to a spot on the staircase where the L is?
Around in here,
Thank you.
or sorry, no, around in here. Right, we're right below the 90,000.
So I'm gonna ask folks do you have, are the next few slides that could go quickly, or is it better for us to show it?
That was it.
Oh, great.
The final, this is a link to where I grabbed from the tax departments and then just a link to the language.
Thank you. Thank you.
So folks, please sit with this. It's a big deal. It's a big part of the work we're doing, and we can discuss it further tomorrow, where I'm hopeful we will have more committee time.
We have a mini special session with Charlie about this chart.
Charlie can send around his chart. We can post it. Maybe Julia can talk us through it.
Would you like a printout copy of it, or would you like
I
a?
would love that.
It's
Yeah, I
much
bet
better in
everybody
printout
would.
form.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks,
I'll
Charlie.
do that.
Charlie's chart. Thank you, Julie.
Julia's math, my chart.
Okay. Representative Parsons, hello.
Hello, everybody. Yes, the one. Good morning.
Good
Morning.
Thank you for having me. For the record, Representative Joseph Parsons in the beautiful town of Newbury, also representing Topsom and Groton, also beautiful towns. So I have an amendment for you all today, which is just striking a section of the bill out that changes the amount of the money going to the pilot program. It's currently at 70-30. In the bill, it goes 75-25. I will, I know, first of all, I apologize for coming kind of 11th hour, but I would say that this holds as much validity as it would in the first hour. Yeah. My suggestion is that those numbers actually remain the same at 70-30. Right now, changing those numbers, it kind of gives the notion that the calculation problem is on the front end. That $10 million we've accrued over time is because we're taking too much. I would say to you all, the problem is on the back end, and we're not giving our towns the correct amount of money. We're shortchanging our towns is why that money's sitting there. So instead of coming up to what that should be and all of that, which is work to be done, I'm saying that before we change those, I think that's a conversation that needs to happen. This was something that was brought to me in the off session from a constituent in Groton, actually, feeling that, you know, it's great and all that we want to conserve all this land, and Groton certainly does their fair share for the state. But it would be nice if the pilot payment coming to their town was fair.
So my understanding, and I would love to get some testimony from JFO about this, is that, and this sort of further exemplifies the need for us to spend more time on your language than we have today.
I actually don't have language.
But
My amendment is nothing.
yes, that's true. On your idea. Some more time on your idea is that pilot payments for land and forest actually come from the general fund and are an A&R thing.
Yep.
And pilot payments that come from the pilot fund are for buildings and are done by the tax department. And so the fund that you're looking to keep overflowing with surplus is not related to the land you're hoping to get bigger.
It is,
payments.
I understand that, but
Okay.
it's also built, yes.
Okay, so can
It's,
you talk through that a little bit more with me?
when I went to Kirby Keaton, I basically gave him the situation I was with of them feeling that the buildings and the land are undervalued. And my answer to him was, to be fair with you, I don't know how that all works. So I don't know if your town is, I will not use his words, how he described how he felt. But so I went to Kirby. He gave me kind of the breakdown of how it all happens. Does everyone, I have kind of like the breakdown of how this is calculated. If everyone already knows, I don't want to go through this whole thing, but
You're welcome to. We could also hear it from JFO if
All
that
right.
sounds nicer.
I'll give it a whirl and they can clean it up.
Okay.
So with the buildings, one of the odd things that we do is that we use the assessed value of the property. And then we use the CLA as well, just like anyone else would. However, we don't use the assessed value. We use the insured value, which I'm not 100% sure how I feel about it. The CLA is used to equal everything out. It seems like an odd way to do it, to have two separate systems. And then there is the land one. My apologies. Yeah, and then there's a split with the land before April 1st, 2016 and after that date of how it's calculated. Before, I believe it's 0.6% of fair market value at that time. And then we can make, every 3 to 5 years, they come to us with a suggestion of increases. And in 22, we raised it 1.29%, which I don't.
Raised what, 1.29%?
That was our increase to the value of the properties, I believe. Because they still use the town's property tax rate, I believe. And then we say how much the value is going up to. Like I said, they're gonna have to clean this up. But yeah, it seems like the hold harmless payments towns get for land in our current use program really is truly that. It's a hold harmless, kind of evens out. It's a fair wash, whether that property is in that program or not. The towns get 100% reimbursed. It's just the split between the landowner and the state. But when it comes to state-owned properties and buildings, that's where it starts to, I feel, dive off in how the return to the towns. For both of those. And there's a whole reasonings to that. But when I looked, Kirby gave me the information. I'll do for the land. He didn't do the buildings on this one. Yeah, I think the most expensive piece of land we have is at $1,100 an acre in Groton, and then 800 and something in Newbury, which I would highly suggest if you ever find land for that to buy it up.
And that's the A&R calculation.
That's the A&R calculation, correct.
From the-
So, yeah, I'm saying before, so to your point, correct, this is for the building section. But both of them, I think, need some work before we go tinkering with them and then switch them back if we find out that. So yeah, I was gonna be coming probably next session with more thought out plan of better addressing this and then leave it all with you, but this came up and I jumped at the opportunity, so.
Representative Feltus, did you have? You had your hand up a while ago. Okay. There is a fairly comprehensive pilot report from Issue Brief, which is not as comprehensive as a report, excuse me. That we've done a little bit of exploring and we can hear a little bit more from Ted about. But my understanding is that we're still going to have significant surplus in this fund and be building more surplus from there, even with this switch. And I think it would be worth this committee's time to spend some time diving into how, and probably GovOps on how pilot payments do work in both buckets.
Yep.
And you're welcome to send us a short form for us.
That's
It's working.
what I was gonna be.
If you want to do that now, we might have time in the second half of the session. Or do it next year, but I think that would be a great use of this committee's time. Certainly don't think we could do it with this bill, and
No,
looking forward to hearing from Ted, because I think that we could address exactly what you're describing and not, and still maintain the language in the bill that we have on the floor today. But we can ask Ted about that unless someone else has a little more questions for the representative.
nope. It would be my hope is that if this change does happen, that we're not kind of crossing in the night and then realizing, oh, actually, we shouldn't have decreased that.
We actually had a lot of pressure to move the percentages even further and didn't, so that we could, in fact, not wind up in the situation that you are describing, because we don't like to change and then unchange. So thank you
Perfect.
very much.
Thank you all for your time.
Yeah, thank you. Ted, would you like to join us? Of course. Okay, I do hope you read his issue brief. It's delightful.
Yeah.
Okay, thank
I can send it to you.
You can send it to me?
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure. Ted Burnett, Joint Fiscal Office. What I thought I would do really quickly is run through high level A&R pilot payments, how they work. And then also contrast that with the general pilot payment. We've done this in this committee before, but yes, kind of outline those two structures. The A&R pilot payment is an 80-20 split between the general fund and A&R. I'm just gonna leave so it doesn't do that. I was looking at it and it was muted. I don't know how that happened. Okay. So yes, 80-20 split between general fund and funds provided by A&R. This payment shows up in a B section in the budget, B 701. For fiscal year 26, it is $2.7 million, 2.2, almost $2.3 million is general fund, and there's a $421,500 transfer, interdepartmental transfer by A&R. And so that's what comprises those two funds. The calculation is done by taking your grand list value and the municipal town rate at the time the property was acquired. And so that comprises the base payment, and what A&R does, and as Representative Parson, A&R will recommend an increase in that base payment. They last did it in 2022, and then it was effective for fiscal year 23. So all towns in their base payment receive that extra 1.29%. And they are anticipated, so there's statute that requires them to come forward every 3 to 5 years to recommend an adjustment of that base payment. So that could happen. That didn't happen this year, so 2026 or 2027 session, A&R comes in their budget request and makes a recommendation to increase the base payment. So that's how pilot payments for land operate. And then building, so, you know, at Alice State Park, they have the underlying land and they have pavilions and campground infrastructure. Those buildings on state-owned land get paid through the general pilot payment. And I don't know if it'd be helpful for the committee to have a review of that pilot payment, or it's in the issue brief. I've covered it before. I don't know if that's of interest.
Is that of it? Does anyone? Okay. Please,
Great.
please go forth.
Sure. So the general pilot payment for buildings is based on the insurance replacement value of those buildings. Those values are provided to the agency administration for the purposes of calculating those payments. And so the insurance replacement values are multiplied by the CLA. And I know that's because it's the opposite. It's how we normally think about how our CLA works. And it's because those calculations are happening in the opposite direction. So the CLA in the education sense is taking municipal or locally assessed properties and making sure that they reflect their statewide value. The logic here is that you have insurance replacement values that are uniform across the state. And so you're using the CLA, you're multiplying to bring those values, in most cases, down to how municipalities have valued their property, so that you're taking comparable values between what's being pulled in through pilot and what's existing on the municipality's grant list. So you have your insurance replacement value, and I should, that is grant list value multiplied by the CLA. You have your state-owned additions to the grant list. The state-owned additions to the grant list, that value is the amount of budgeted revenue that the town needs to raise. That budgeted revenue is divided by the state-owned additions to get an adjusted tax rate. And you have your pilot state-owned additions to the grand list multiplied by your adjusted tax rate to get the pilot payment. So it's a different mechanism. It's fairly complicated in words, but seeing it in the equations, I could hold it. They're in the back of the issue brief. There's an appendix that gives an example for the town of Randolph, how that works.
Yes.
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
I'm assuming that for the state-owned buildings, there's one insurance company that does them all, or am I wrong? Does each town have their insurance values?
No, those, as far as I understand, those informations are provided by a contractor who maintains them, since they're state-owned, right? So the agency of administration has a contractor that goes out and maintains those insurance replacement values, and that's done at the state level.
And again, those insurance values have predominantly been much higher than an assessed value, correct? That's why your description of using that CLA to actually reduce the price.
I can't comment on whether they're higher and or lower than, because it's hard to find comparable properties, right? So
Yeah.
like state-owned buildings are gonna be hard to find, and I haven't done the analysis of what the difference is. I can just comment that they are insurance replacement values.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
I was gonna say, I think it's really funky because I looked at one particular town where the state-owned buildings had their price fixed according to the replacement value. And the grand list of that town went up. So as a percentage of the total grand list, the state-owned property was less. So the actual contribution to the town was less. So it's really a weird, perverse way that it worked that way. So we really do need to dive into this in greater detail.
So we do need to dive into this in greater detail. Totally believe that. Really glad you created that issue brief so that we would have all of this information to dive into it with. For the language that we have in the bill and the amendment attached to it, can you remind us how much revenue will still be left in the fund with which to fix things in the future, and how much you imagine there will still be sort of excess and or growing revenue in the fund?
Sure. So with the proposed 75% allocation to towns, this is in the 397 fiscal note. We're working on a table that's on page 4. I could try to hop back in the Zoom, but
It's okay.
I don't want to create echoes again.
Lots of devices.
Yes, so the estimate that with a 75% allocation to towns, the pilot special fund share would be $14 million. The governor's recommended fiscal year 26 appropriation for pilot is $12.2 million. So that provides some cushion, right, to account for the payment to correctional facilities, which is not in that $12.2 million, any payments to contractor, et cetera. With a 70% allocation to towns, the pilot special fund share would be $16.82 million against that approximately $12.5 million in spending, up from the base appropriation the governor recommends. So that, yes, you're looking at that's over $4 million in additional revenue with a 70% allocation.
And we're also imagining, though you cannot predict the future, that we are going to have more local option tax towns coming online pretty regularly at this point. So that might grow more from there.
Yeah, so this is, these numbers incorporate the towns that approved local option taxes at town meeting day and would come online in fiscal year 26. If there were additional ones, those wouldn't be factored, but yes, for fiscal year 26, it does incorporate those new towns.
Any more quick questions for Ted? So, folks, I feel comfortable with the existing split that we have in the bill, and that we still have a lot of room to make what sound like both some rationalizing in the law and some maybe getting some more money to communities. But I don't think we can do that today. Okay, but I think
You mean because the bill's on the floor?
that the bill's on the floor, yes.
Yeah.
And, yeah. And I was about to say, I wish we had started talking about the beginning session, but we've talked about enough stuff this session. We don't need to add any more things to those delightful months we spent together. Thank you, Ted.
So if Representative Parsons is going to offer an amendment, do we need to take a straw poll on that amendment before we?
Yeah, so I would recommend that we find the amendment unfavorable, but we fully, and I'd like everyone at this table to commit to actually fixing this problem, and maybe 1 or 2 people really volunteering once we get the ed finance bill out to like really take the lead on trying to fix that. How does that sound to folks?
Awesome.
Okay,
You may pull that anyway, right?
that's my hope, but who knows what will happen. Okay, so straw poll to find the Parsons amendment unfavorable. And favorable. That looks 11-0 to me.
Yeah.
Great, you got that, Representative Wozniak? Okay. Who wants to fix this weird thing?
I like the challenge, yeah.
Great. Okay, great, okay.
Already on halfway there as well.
Thank you very much, folks. And we're all invited to go have lunch with the superintendents at Capitol Plaza today.